Have you ever felt your meticulously crafted plans crumble at the worst possible moment, when a seemingly unshakable advantage turns against you? Imagine that fateful night on Saipan, June 17th, 1944, at 3:30 a.m., when Colonel Tadashi Goto, commanding 37 Japanese Type 95 tanks, was certain of his triumph. He believed the sheer mass of his armored vehicles and the audacious surprise of a night attack would overwhelm the marine defenses, paving the way to the strategically vital radio station. But how did what was intended to be a crushing blow devolve into catastrophe? How did the Americans manage to turn the advantage of darkness against the attackers themselves? And most importantly, what unobvious steps allowed them not just to hold their ground, but to utterly annihilate an enemy who seemingly held all the cards? Prepare to discover a story that redefined notions of night combat and defensive tactics, demonstrating how meticulous preparation and a deep understanding of the enemy's psychology can shatter even the most powerful assault. What transpired on the Saipan beachhead is not merely a military chronicle. It's a lesson in transforming apparent hopelessness into a decisive victory when the stakes are incredibly high. According to all military doctrine of the era, night tank attacks were considered supremely effective. In pitch darkness, enemy defensive lines were virtually blind, unable to timely detect and repel an approaching threat. However, on Saipan, these dogmas shattered. Suddenly, as if by an unseen hand, the night sky above the beachhead erupted with thousands of dazzling lights. Illumination rounds blossomed overhead, transforming the nocturnal gloom into an artificial, unnaturally bright day. In that moment, Sergeant Chuck Shira, gripping his bazooka tightly, watched as the battlefield, seconds ago steeped in darkness, became as bright as midday, revealing everything that should have remained hidden. The sudden burst of light was not just a blinding shock for the Japanese tank crews. It was a death sentence. Their eyes, accustomed to darkness, now struggled to discern their surroundings, and their minds instantly grasped the fatal error. The armor of their Type 95 tanks, ranging from only 12 to 25 millimeters thick, was utterly insufficient to withstand the barrage of fire the Marines, now clearly seeing their targets, were about to unleash. The vehicles, intended to seize the beachhead in minutes under the cover of night, were now starkly visible, as if painted against the bright sky, stripped of all cover, surprise, and most importantly, any chance of success. Just 6 hours later, 31 charred hulks of these steel giants would litter the battlefield, silent testaments to the disaster. The Japanese never saw the meticulously constructed chain of annihilation awaiting them in this trap. But what preceded this moment? How did the Marines manage to prepare such a perfect defense? The silence that enveloped the Saipan beachhead with the sunset of June 16 was merely the deceptive calm before the storm. It concealed frantic yet methodical preparations destined to decide the outcome of the impending battle. Sergeant Chuck Shira, feeling the lingering heat of the day's warmth on the olive-drab finish of his M1 bazooka, adjusted his grip. Around him, 6 fellow Marines had spent the afternoon deepening and fortifying their positions. These fortifications already appeared far more robust than the haphazard shelters of the initial hours after the landing. Meanwhile, artillery crews meticulously zeroed their 105mm guns, plotting precise coordinates for probable enemy approach routes. Bazooka teams, like Shira's, received detailed instructions and range cards marking critical points in the Western Ravine. The very one leading directly to the radio station, a key objective situated behind their defensive lines. Every inch of that ravine was now targeted. Beside Shira, Private First Class Robert Brown meticulously checked his M6A3 rockets for the third time since dusk. Their blunt-nosed warheads might have seemed crude compared to the elegant artillery shells whose trajectories they had observed all day. Yet Brown had no doubt about their lethal effectiveness. He had personally witnessed the power of high-explosive anti-tank heat charges during grueling training at Camp Pendleton. Their operating principle was simple yet ingenious. A copper cone inside the warhead focused the explosive energy into a narrow, superheated jet of gas and molten metal, capable of penetrating armor regardless of the impact angle. Against the thin 12-25mm plates of the Japanese Type 95 tanks, these rockets were an absolute death sentence at ranges of 100 to 150 yards. This apparent simplicity concealed a power capable of altering the course of battle. As darkness deepened, Lieutenant Colonel John Walker unhurriedly inspected the positions, his calm and confident presence instilling unwavering resolve in the hearts of the Marines. Every combatant already felt it in their bones. The beachhead was not merely holding, it was ready for the trial. Moreover, thanks to meticulous preparation and organization, it was beginning to resemble a fortress capable not only of surviving the coming night, but emerging victorious. This sense of confidence stemmed not just from the soldiers' courage, but also from the deliberate placement of every defensive element. Behind the forward companies, cleverly positioned within the natural cover of the defilade, were M3 75mm self-propelled guns. Their experienced crews, operating as a single organism, executed fire missions with surgical precision, fully aware of their role in the impending battle. In strategic reserve, a platoon of M4A2 Sherman tanks, veritable steel fists, lay poised, their powerful 75mm guns loaded with high-explosive HE shells. These rounds were intended to finish off any target that lighter anti-tank weapons might only damage, ensuring the ultimate destruction of enemy armor. Every element of this defensive system was a piece of a larger, deadly puzzle. At the heart of the defense, the radio station hummed with continuous activity. Operators maintained vital communication with the fleet offshore. The battleship USS California and its escort were prepared for counter-battery missions, but their true value that night lay elsewhere. Their powerful illumination rounds could be fired upon the first request. These 5-inch giants were capable of transforming pitch darkness into bright day across a front several hundred yards wide. Artillery officers had already meticulously mapped all anticipated enemy concentration points along the most probable approach routes, awaiting only the command to unleash upon the enemy not just fire, but also the light that was destined to be their undoing. Sergeant Shira, a veteran of the fighting on Guadalcanal, unmistakably recognized the sounds of Japanese preparations. And so, from midnight, a distant rumble of engines began to grow, punctuated by the characteristic grinding of tracks crawling over coral grit and sharp, clipped commands. In the tropical air, these sounds carried much farther than one might imagine. This time, however, it was different, larger in scale. It wasn't just the noise of an approaching enemy. It was a roar that heralded something more significant. The sound of a desperate, all-encompassing assault. where the enemy was committing everything they had for one decisive breakthrough. The tension mounted with each passing second, reaching its zenith. Precisely at 3:30 a.m., the night exploded. Piercing bugle calls echoed throughout the ravine, signaling the start of the attack. From the absolute darkness, like phantoms, the first tanks appeared, moving in groups of 4 or 5 vehicles. Their silhouettes were barely discernible against the dark ridge, but their presence was undeniable. Infantry rode on the tanks' hulls, then followed them in loose combat formations, their light machine guns already chattering, spraying fire at the Marines' presumed positions. These were Type 95 tanks, the very ones they'd been briefed on, Scherer realized, but never before had they encountered them in such incredible numbers. By his quick count, there were 37 of them, an entire armada, advancing with the self-assuredness of crews who genuinely believed that surprise was still on their side, ensuring them an unconditional victory. At this critical juncture, when chaos seemed poised to engulf everything, Lieutenant Colonel Walker's calm and remarkably precise voice cut through the radio net. His words, delivered without a hint of panic, were a clear command destined to alter the course of the battle. Illumination, fire for effect. Just seconds later, the sky above the ravine erupted. Powerful illumination rounds flared overhead, flooding the entire area with a harsh, unnatural white light that transformed the battlefield into a surreal landscape of sharp, frightening shadows and bone-white coral. This light, like dozens of artificial suns, instantly snatched the Japanese tanks from the darkness. Suddenly exposed, their crews seemed to falter, their advance slowing as the horrifying realization dawned upon them. Darkness, their primary ally and guarantor of surprise, had betrayed them, leaving them utterly defenseless. Private Brown, his Camp Pendleton training now fully vindicated, instantly loaded his first rocket and froze in readiness. An empty M1 bazooka weighed only 13 pounds, allowing 2 men to move quickly between positions. But it was its heat warhead that made the weapon a lethal sentence for any armor the Japanese could field. At 120 yards, well within effective range, he focused, aligned the simple iron sights on the lead tank's flank, and without hesitation, squeezed the trigger. The rocket, emitting a characteristic whoosh, streaked through the illuminated opening and struck the Type 95 with surgical precision just ahead of its track. The heat charge detonated with a sharp but surprisingly quiet crack, almost anticlimactic compared to the grand fireworks of the illumination rounds overhead. Yet the result was clear. The tank lurched to a halt, and thick smoke began to billow from its fighting compartment, signaling the start of a chain reaction of destruction. As soon as the first tank was hit, the infantry riding on its hull scattered in panic, desperately seeking any cover. At that very moment, a second bazooka team already engaged, targeting the next armored vehicle. The 30-centimeter guns, previously silent, now opened fire, emitting their characteristic sharp bark. Their crews swiftly switched between armor-piercing, AP, and canister rounds, depending on the target that appeared in their sights. At ranges up to 500 yards, the AP rounds of these guns could penetrate up to 53 millimeters of armor at a 30-degree angle, more than enough to pierce the thin plates protecting the Japanese tank crews. And when enemy infantry massed in the open, canister rounds transformed these guns into veritable giant shotguns, Each such round unleashed hundreds of steel balls that swept through the kill zones with terrifying mechanical efficiency, leaving behind only chaos and destruction. Colonel Tadashi Goto, at the heart of this agony, watched in horror as his meticulously planned assault, based on a doctrine emphasizing sheer mass and irresistible momentum, disintegrated. His Type 95 tanks, equipped with 37mm guns, were effective against infantry, but in terms of range and penetrating power, they were catastrophically inferior to every weapon the Marines deployed against them. Worse still, the thin 12-25mm armor, intended to protect his crews, was designed for an entirely different type of warfare. One where anti-tank weapons were cumbersome, extremely rare, and incredibly difficult to deploy effectively. Under the blinding light of the illumination rounds, all these fundamental assumptions collapsed, exposing fatal miscalculations. The night on Saipan became not merely a defeat, but a stark demonstration of how outdated doctrines can lead to catastrophe in the face of innovative and well-conceived defense. They were confident of victory. Their plans seemed flawless, their striking power unstoppable. But on that fateful night, all their assumptions collapsed overnight, leaving behind only burning hulks and shattered hopes. Have you ever felt meticulously crafted strategies disintegrate before your eyes, leaving only chaos? Today, we delve into a story where something similar happened on the scale of an entire battle, revealing how seemingly inevitable defeat turned into triumph through shrewd tactics. How did the Marines manage not just to halt, but to completely annihilate an enemy armored column that outnumbered them? And what key defensive elements transformed the Western Ravine into a deadly trap? Prepare to learn how one of World War II's most audacious attacks became a catastrophe for the aggressor and for the defenders. A demonstration of unyielding will and tactical genius. And the first to meet the enemy face to face wielded a weapon capable of burning through steel without relying on brute force. These overconfident calculations by the Japanese command were utterly shattered. From the very first moments, Marine bazooka teams demonstrated astonishing coordination and lethal effectiveness. They moved swiftly between carefully prepared positions, striking from distances where a miss was simply impossible. Having just fired their deadly rocket, the soldiers would vanish, changing cover before enemy return fire could pinpoint their location. The secret to their success lay not in kinetic energy. The 2.36-inch rockets didn't require high velocity to penetrate armor. The heat charge performed its work through a chemical reaction, transforming a copper cone into a superheated jet that sliced through steel armor with ease, like a scorching cutter. As more enemy tanks stalled or erupted in bright flames, the next echelons of defense, the M3 self-propelled guns, entered the fray, their 75mm guns possessing devastating high explosive power at close ranges, had awaited this moment since the initial landing. Each shell fired struck its targets with a thunderous impact, shaking the ground and scattering debris, preparing the way for the next strike. Next, like predators awaiting their moment, platoons of Sherman tanks advanced. They occupied strategically important positions that offered ideal opportunities for flanking attacks on the Japanese columns. Under the bright illumination provided by the fleet's powerful searchlights offshore, this no longer resembled a desperate fight, but rather well-rehearsed target practice. The M4A2 models, equipped with the same 75mm gun as the self-propelled units, also boasted far more robust armor protection and impressive mobility, allowing them to rapidly reconfigure and adapt to changing tactical situations. In one such vehicle, Brown quickly loaded another rocket while Sergeant Shira coolly selected the next victim. A Japanese Type 95 tank approached to within just 100 yards of their position, so close that the panic in the frantic movements of its commander, desperately trying to aim his gun at the elusive Marine positions, was clearly visible. A precise shot. The rocket struck the tank's side, easily penetrating its relatively thin armor and detonating directly inside the fighting compartment. The enemy vehicle shuddered to a halt. Its main gun, as if in impotent rage, pointed uselessly into the night sky. As the first rays of dawn began to break through the horizon, the western ravine presented a horrifying tableau. Littered with 31 smoking hulks of enemy vehicles, their crews were either dead or scattered in panic. Japan's 9th Tank Regiment, which only hours before had seemed invincible, ceased to exist as a coordinated fighting unit, its commander among those who fell in the carnage. However, in those decisive first minutes after 3:30 a.m., when illumination rounds fired from the fleet transformed pitch darkness into bright day, and the bazooka's heat charges began their deadly work, the outcome of this grand confrontation was not yet predetermined. It was shaped by the hands of fearless combatants like Sergeant Shira and Private Brown. Marines who had thoroughly mastered the art of transforming colossal American industrial might into precise and devastating firepower, capable of crushing any, even the most desperate. Quote 21. From his command post, Lieutenant Colonel Walker, like a conductor, meticulously oversaw the unfolding battle. He understood perfectly that true victory in this engagement would be achieved not through the superiority of a single weapon type, but through exquisite coordination and mutual support of overlapping fields of fire. The Western Ravine, stretching from Gapan to the strategically vital radio station, had appeared to the Japanese command during daytime planning sessions as the most obvious, perhaps even too obvious route for an advance. Yet they chose it. Now, this seemingly logical choice had become a fatal error and played directly into the Marines' hands, funneling enemy armor straight into pre-planned kill zones. These zones had been prepared with the methodical precision Walker had honed over 2 decades of peacetime. Anticipating such scenarios, the chain of annihilation he had devised functioned flawlessly, exactly as intended. It was Sergeant Shira's bazooka team, forming the first link in this deadly chain, that disabled the lead elements of the enemy column within the first minutes of contact. Their accurate shots knocked out tracks and incapacitated crews at ranges where heat warheads were guaranteed to penetrate armor. The Japanese Type 95 tanks, with their relatively thin armor ranging from 12 to 25 millimeters, could not provide any meaningful protection against this new generation of weaponry. Its lethality was based not on brute kinetic impact, but on the destructive power of chemical energy. Each M6A3 rocket contained a copper cone that, upon detonation, focused the explosive force into a narrow, directed jet. This jet was capable of burning through steel plate of any thickness, regardless of the angle of impact or deflection, reducing even the strongest metal to nothing. While the Japanese advance, like a broken mechanism, stalled under a hail of bazooka fire, 30-meter guns entered the fray. Their attention quickly shifted from disabled armor to enemy infantry, who, moving in loose formations, attempted to use the tanks as cover. Corporal Martinez, an experienced commander, had perfected his crew's training, allowing them to switch instantly between armor-piercing and canister rounds with practiced efficiency. He masterfully read the changing tactical situation, selecting the ideal ammunition for each new target. At ranges up to 400 yards, his gun easily penetrated the frontal armor of any Japanese tank on the battlefield. However, when enemy infantry began to gather in the open, canister rounds transformed the gun into a giant shotgun, unleashing hundreds of steel pellets across the engagement zones, leaving no chance of survival. But what awaited those who managed to pass through this hail of lead? Stay with us and watch until the end to fully grasp the brilliance of this defensive operation. We would be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're joining us from. The next echelon in the layered defensive system was the 75mm M3 self-propelled guns. They were skillfully positioned in defilade, hidden behind the forward companies, ready to strike. Their crews possessed not only decisive, high explosive power at close ranges, but also high mobility, allowing them to rapidly regroup and adapt to the dynamics of the evolving battle. Staff Sergeant Williams, anticipating possible attack directions, positioned his combat vehicle to effectively cover the northern approach to a strategically important radio station. Its powerful 70mm gun was loaded with special shells capable of not just finishing off any enemy tank already damaged by lighter weaponry, but doing so with surgical precision, disabling it completely without utterly destroying it. Yet, even after this, another, most formidable line awaited the enemy. Behind these self-propelled guns, like patient hunters who knew their prey was inevitably being driven straight to them, lay a platoon of Sherman tanks. The M4A2 tanks, though equipped with the same 75mm gun as the self-propelled units, boasted significantly improved armor protection and unparalleled tactical flexibility provided by their full-track mobility. Their crews were thoroughly briefed on the specifics of the Japanese armor they would face. Thin-skinned machines armed with 37mm and 47mm guns. While these guns could be effective against infantry, they were hopelessly outmatched by American weaponry in both range and firepower, especially in this terrain and under the specific lighting conditions. But there was one more element that made this defense truly impregnable. Above the battlefield, like an artificial sun, illumination rounds continuously hung, fired from naval vessels. They represented a key, connected element that unified all these disparate weapons into a single, lethal system. Without this bright illumination, Japanese tanks could well have approached to distances where their, albeit inferior, guns might still have inflicted significant casualties. However, under the sharp, dazzling white light of the 5-inch naval illumination rounds, a surprise attack became utterly impossible. Moreover, the darkness which the Japanese had relied so heavily upon for a concealed mass approach transformed from an advantage into a genuine liability. Tank commanders who had planned to use the cover of night for an unexpected breakthrough now found themselves silhouetted against the coral landscape, like stationary targets on a firing range, awaiting their fate. This became a true nightmare for every Japanese tank crewman. Private Nakamura, hunched behind the 37mm gun of his Type 95 tank, desperately tried to spot any targets. In this blinding light, Enemy positions seemed to appear and instantly vanish with maddening, exhausting unpredictability. The carefully prepared marine positions, with their overlapping fields of fire, completely deprived his crew of the ability to make a clear, aimed shot. Simultaneously, his tank was constantly subjected to the merciless impact of enemy weapons, capable of easily penetrating its armor from distances where any retaliatory action by the Japanese would be completely ineffective. It was a true meat grinder from which there was no escape. Conventional wisdom, which asserted the inviolability of a doctrine based on the overwhelming superiority of heavy armor and firepower, proved not just mistaken, it became fatal. Imagine, you are inside a multi-ton machine, protected by the latest alloys, confident in your almost absolute invincibility. And then, in an instant, that confidence shatters into dust. What if your greatest strength, your armor, turns not into protection, but into a trap? How is this possible? And most importantly, could a similar scenario threaten you when familiar methods cease to work and everything you believed in turns out to be false? Today, we will delve into the history of a confrontation where outdated tactics and blind faith in technological superiority led to disaster. And we will show how three unexpected principles of combat completely turned the situation around. Against all expectations, it was superiority in defense that became the Achilles heel, and apparent weakness the key to victory. We will reveal how this paradox occurred, and here is the first principle that changed everything, creating an insurmountable gap between knowledge and reality. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you're watching us from. We're very interested. Operation Steel Shield, initially conceived as a display of force and rapid response, became a textbook example of how not to conduct combat in asymmetric conflict conditions. The doctrine that directed a column of 40 armored personnel carriers and tanks into this narrow mountain pass relied on assumptions of superior firepower and damage resistance. However, these assumptions were made for a completely different type of confrontation, for another theater of war. The sequence of events planned by Field Commander Phoenix at dawn unfolded with the methodical precision of a well-rehearsed play where every role was meticulously executed. Anti-tank grenade launcher crews concealed in the terrain, disabled mobility, and incapacitated crews at distances of 70-120 meters, close enough for shape-charge warheads to work with maximum effectiveness, penetrating even reactive armor, which was supposed to be the last line of defense. Heavy machine guns, mounted in hidden positions, engaged at distances up to 600 meters, switching between armor-piercing rounds capable of hitting light armored vehicles and vulnerable points, and high-explosive rounds that turned infantry clusters accompanying the vehicles into irretrievable losses. Snipers with precision weapons finished off anything that remained mobile or posed a constant threat to rebel positions, methodically eliminating commanders and weapon operators. Colonel Hart, commanding the column, employed tactics that worked flawlessly in open deserts and wide plains, where his forces lacked only overwhelming numbers of the enemy, not his cunning. But here, in the narrow confines of Dragon's Ridge, everything was different. Phoenix fighters operating their weapons had trained with them for years, learning the advantages that rocket-propelled grenades and improvised explosive devices offered against thick but insufficiently flexible armor. They understood that the lack of need for heavy launchers allowed them to quickly change firing positions, and the cumulative effect of the warheads made armor thickness only a relative obstacle at these combat distances, negating decades of development. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we would be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to write in the comments where you're watching us from. We're very interested. Sergeant Rashid, hidden among the rock formations, reloaded his grenade launcher with practiced movements, feeling the weight of the next rocket, which had become an extension of his arm. The blunt-nosed warhead, though unassuming compared to elegant artillery shells, had repeatedly proven its devastating effectiveness against enemy armored vehicles. At 110 meters, the rocket would reach its target with sufficient speed, ensuring the ideal detonation of the shaped charge, and the resulting jet of molten metal would effortlessly burn through the side armor of even the most modern armored personnel carrier, as if it weren't there, leaving behind only smoking ruins. The advantage in rate of fire and adaptability belonged entirely to the rebels. Grenade launcher crews could reload and engage new targets much faster than armored vehicle crews could aim their weapons and find firing solutions amidst constantly changing threats and limited visibility. Machine gun crews, working in a rhythm honed to automatic precision, could unleash up to 200 rounds per minute. And snipers, despite a slower tempo, maintained constant pressure, hitting vulnerable points and demoralizing the enemy. This space allowed them to engage multiple targets before the column could organize any meaningful return fire, let alone a counterattack. As the battle entered its second phase, Phoenix realized that his defensive system was functioning with impeccable precision, demonstrating astonishing effectiveness. Overlapping fields of fire, covering the entire mountain pass, left no chance for enemy armor to find cover or use the landscape for concealment, making them easy targets. Flashbangs and smoke screens, used according to a pre-planned scheme, eliminated any attempts by darkness or natural obstacles that could allow infiltration or flanking maneuvers, depriving the enemy of the advantage of surprise. Most importantly, the combination of light but powerful weapons gave his fighters the ability to engage targets at distances where their advantages in mobility and knowledge of the terrain were absolutely decisive, outweighing technological superiority. Heavy armored personnel carriers and tanks, which had seemed so formidable in the pre-dawn gloom, now appeared as obsolete, cumbersome machines, manned by brave but doomed crews sent on a mission that was doomed to fail. Their multi-layered armor, designed to counteract kinetic penetrators and heavy machine guns, proved useless against shape charge weapons, which bypassed traditional protection through chemical rather than physical effects. Their powerful 30mm and 120mm guns could sweep away any fortifications, but they lacked the aiming speed and flexibility to engage hidden, constantly moving targets at effective ranges, turning them into stationary firing points, easily bypassed and destroyed. A gunner named Amin selected a new target as the column's advance continued to funnel armored vehicles directly into the kill zone, as if into a trap. The tactical task had now become almost intuitive. Acquire, aim, fire, immediately change position, reload. The shape charge did the rest, transforming the physics of the explosion into armor penetration that no amount of steel plating could prevent. bypassing even the most advanced defense systems. Around him, the chain of destruction continued its methodical work, each weapon system contributing to an outcome that became inevitable as soon as the first shots shattered the morning's silence and painted it in crimson tones. Flares, launched from Phoenix Command Post, again illuminated the pass at 0615, sending another burst of bright, merciless light over the western slope where Colonel Hart's column continued its doomed advance. The illumination worked with mechanical precision, each volley casting a sharp white light for several hundred meters of rocky terrain and sparse vegetation, leaving no chance for shadows. What began as a coordinated assault quickly disintegrated into a series of individual attempts to survive as crews found themselves separated by disabled vehicles and increasingly accurate rebel fire, losing any semblance of organization. Sergeant Rashid tracked another armored personnel carrier through his grenade launcher's sight as it tried to maneuver around a burning hulk, which was his crew's third destroyed vehicle that morning. The vehicle commander attempted to use the wreckage as cover, but the illumination flares eliminated any Quote 51 where enemy armor could hide, exposing it to full view. At 100 meters, within the rocket's effective range, Rashid pulled the trigger and watched as the shaped charge detonated in the rear of the armored personnel carrier. The explosion was sharp and brief, but smoke began to pour from the engine compartment within seconds, signaling its imminent end. A fighter named Hassan was already loading the next round, his movements automatic despite the chaos around their position, which had become the eye of the storm. The blunt-nosed warhead slid into the launcher with practiced ease, and Hassan clapped Rashid on the shoulder, signaling readiness. They had fired 10 rockets since the start of the engagement, achieving 7 direct hits and 3 near misses that forced enemy crews to abandon their vehicles and flee. Shape charge technology, which had seemed almost theoretical during training, proved devastatingly effective against armor that provided no significant protection against chemical energy penetrators, leaving behind only fields of wreckage and defeat. Imagine the pitch-black darkness of night envelops everything, and a deluge of steel monsters advances upon you seemingly inevitably. In such a situation, anyone would feel a chilling fear and hopelessness. Have you ever been in a situation where all odds were against you? When the enemy outnumbered you, and you were outmatched, surrounded by the unknown, and every sound could signal the end? The Marines on Saipan experienced this to the fullest. But they not only held their ground, they crushed the enemy, turning a desperate defense into a triumphant battle that redefined night tank warfare. How was it possible to withstand such a mass of armor in complete darkness when every shot could be the last? What was the secret weapon that fundamentally changed the course of the battle when all seemed lost and conventional optics were practically useless? And how did technology and tactics transform a deadly threat into a demonstration of absolute superiority? In this video, we will reveal 3 key aspects that allowed American Marines to turn what seemed like inevitable defeat into one of the most brilliant victories of World War II. And you'll learn the first of them in just a few moments. Against all expectations, it was light, not darkness, that became their main ally. But how do you illuminate the battlefield without giving away your position, and at the same time make the enemy vulnerable? Stay with us and watch until the end. we'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, write in the comments where you're watching us from. As we prepare to unveil this astonishing tactic, let's return to the battlefield. To the left of the main engagement area, Corporal Martinez continued his methodical work with the 37mm gun. His crew, having shifted tactics, switched to armor-piercing rounds as Japanese tanks penetrated deeper into their kill zone. Each shot was the result of careful aiming, targeted at distances where penetration of enemy armor was guaranteed. At 450 yards, his gun could penetrate over 50 millions of armor at a 30-degree angle, more than double the protection provided by the thickest plates on Type 95 tanks. The tank he was tracking now stopped abruptly as his round penetrated the turret ring, instantly disabling the main gun and likely killing the gunner. But what was happening to the infantry accompanying these tanks? Japanese soldiers, who had ridden into battle on the hulls of the armored vehicles, found themselves dismounted directly into kill zones swept by canister fire. Martinez changed ammunition types with a speed that came from months of grueling training, loading rounds that turned his gun into a giant shotgun. Each canister round contained several hundred steel pellets that scattered in a deadly pattern. Designed for clearing trenches and suppressing infantry positions against troops caught in the open under the light of illumination flares. The effect of such shelling was truly devastating. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and subscription. And of course, write in the comments where you're watching us from. While lighter guns dealt with infantry and tank weak points, Staff Sergeant Williams brought his 75mm M3 self-propelled gun into action as Japanese tanks advanced closer to the marine perimeter. His gun's high explosive rounds were designed to finish what lighter weapons had started. Any tank that survived bazooka hits or 37mm penetrations now faced a weapon that could completely destroy it. His first target was a Type 95 that had lost a track to bazooka fire, but was still attempting to attack marine positions with its 37mm gun. The 75mm round hit directly under the turret, and the tank vanished in a ball of orange flame, leaving behind only a melted hulk. And that wasn't all. A platoon of Shermans moved forward to pre-prepared positions from which they could attack the flanks of the Japanese columns with their 75mm guns. Lieutenant Hayes positioned his M4A2 to cover the southern approach to the radio station. His crew loaded high-explosive rounds that outranged anything the Japanese tanks could counter. The advantage in such a battle belonged entirely to the side with better optics, longer range guns, and, most importantly, illumination to effectively use both. But what was happening on the other side of this deadly duel? Private Nakamura desperately tried to turn the turret of his Type 95 tank towards the muzzle flashes that appeared and disappeared with maddening unpredictability. The 37mm gun, which had been effective enough against Chinese troops and early American units, proved utterly useless against Marines who had learned to coordinate their fire with high precision. Nakamura's 12mm frontal armor could stop rifle bullets and shell fragments, but it offered no protection against bazooka rockets, which had already disabled most of his squadron. A shaped charge struck the left side of his tank, penetrating the armor with a sharp crack that became the characteristic sound of this battle. Nakamura felt the shockwave rip through the crew compartment, followed by the acrid smoke of burning metal and rubber. The driver slumped over the controls, hydraulic fluid spraying from ruptured hoses. Within seconds, the compartment filled with smoke, making breathing impossible and vision useless, plunging the crew into chaos and agony. Such individual tragedies were part of a much larger disaster caused by a strategic miscalculation. Colonel Goto had committed 37 tanks to this attack, believing that sheer mass and surprise would overwhelm the marine defenses. But the element of surprise vanished, annihilated by star shells that transformed the night battlefield into a deadly zone where Japanese armor was silhouetted against the sky, becoming easy targets. The doctrine, which had worked in earlier campaigns, assumed that American forces lacked adequate anti-tank weapons and the training to use them effectively. On Saipan, these assumptions proved fatal, and the cost of that error was unimaginably high. By 4:30 a.m., 24 Japanese tanks had been destroyed in the 6th Marine Regiment's sector alone. Their hulks were scattered across the coral, grim monuments to tactical obsolescence and failure. Bazooka teams accounted for roughly half of the tanks. Their shaped charges proved that chemical energy could penetrate armor regardless of its thickness at combat ranges. 37mm guns destroyed another 6 tanks with armor-piercing rounds that easily defeated the armor at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Heavier armament, some self-propelled guns and Sherman tanks finished off the remaining tanks with high-explosive shells, leaving nothing salvageable and reducing them to twisted piles of metal. Japanese infantry continued the attack until almost 7 a.m. But without armored support, their assaults lacked the power to seriously threaten marine positions. Canister shots from 37mm guns swept the approaches to the radio station, while Marine small arms fire cut down individual soldiers attempting to infiltrate the perimeter. Star shells continued to burst overhead with mechanical regularity, eliminating any possibility of concealment or surprise and dooming the attackers. When dawn finally broke over the western ravine, it revealed a scene of utter destruction. 31 Japanese tanks lay inert on the coral, some still burning, others already beginning to rust in the humid tropical climate. The 9th Tank Regiment had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Its commander was dead, and the surviving crews were scattered and demoralized. The beachhead, which was supposed to be overrun in hours, had held with casualties almost negligible compared to the slaughter inflicted upon the attackers. Shira lowered his bazooka and surveyed the battlefield with the satisfaction of a craftsman who had performed his work with professional competence. Around him, other Marines were already beginning to count the wrecks and gather intelligence from the disabled vehicles. Shape charges, which had seemed almost too simple during training, had proven their effectiveness in a tank battle that would be studied in military academies for decades. On Saipan, American industrial might and tactical innovation clashed with Japanese bravery and tactical inflexibility. And the outcome was never in doubt once the star shells began to fall. Imagine the scene unfolding at dawn after a night of utter hell. The sky, recently illuminated by the flashes of star shells, now reveals the scale of an unprecedented catastrophe. What lies before your eyes is not just a battlefield, but an entire graveyard of hopes and machines. 31 mangled, charred hulks strewn across Saipan's coral plains like toys torn apart by a giant hand. This was the end of Japanese armored power, embodied by Colonel Goto's 9th Tank Regiment. How was this possible? What changed the rules of war so drastically that seemingly invincible forces were wiped off the map in a single night. And what specific tool, or perhaps an entirely new philosophy of combat, achieved such devastating results when conventional methods proved powerless? Amidst this apocalyptic landscape, Sergeant Shira, like a meticulous investigator at a crime scene, methodically picked his way through the wreckage. His professional eye noted the precise impact marks of various weapons on the armor of the Type 95 tanks. Every penetration, every melted spot told a story, revealing the secrets of large-scale combat operations. Counting the destroyed vehicles was no easy task, as the chaos of night combat blurred sector boundaries and daylight revealed new, previously unnoticed details. Official Marine reports spoke of 31 tanks completely disabled, a shocking testament to a new era in anti-tank warfare. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we are only just beginning to uncover the mysteries of this battle. We would be especially grateful for your like and subscription, and of course let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The thin steel protecting these combat vehicles represented the best that Japanese industry could produce in 1944. However, it proved fatally inadequate against a new generation of weapons, whose lethality was generated not by brute kinetic energy, but by a completely different principle: chemical energy. Armor plating 12 to 25 mm thick, capable of stopping conventional shells, now offered no significant resistance to shaped charges that burned through steel with superheated jets of molten copper. This was a technological leap that transformed seemingly robust protection into mere foil. Private Brown, inspecting one of the Type 95 tanks, the last one his team destroyed that night, carefully studied the aftermath. He noted how an M6A3 rocket had penetrated the rear and detonated inside the crew compartment. The entry hole, surprisingly small, perhaps only 3 inches in diameter, concealed catastrophic internal destruction. The mechanism of shaped charges was elegant in its simplicity. They focused the explosive energy into a narrow jet, traveling at speeds measured in miles per second, creating temperatures sufficient to instantly melt steel upon contact. This physical characteristic, turning basic chemistry into devastating armor penetration, effectively rendered armor thickness completely irrelevant. The bazooka, a seemingly simple weapon, proved its astonishing effectiveness on Saipan in ways that surprised even its most ardent proponents. The 2.36-inch M1 launcher, weighing only 13 pounds empty, was incredibly light, allowing 2-man teams to quickly change positions between shots. More importantly, it produced no recoil that might betray firing positions to enemy observers, preserving the element of surprise. Sergeant Shira's team, for example, fired 11 rockets during the engagement, achieving 9 hits and forcing 2 Japanese crews to abandon their vehicles in panic. The shaped charges functioned exactly as designed, penetrating armor at ranges up to 150 yards, regardless of impact angle or plate thickness, becoming a true nightmare for the enemy. And as we continue to delve into the details of this pivotal battle, don't forget to stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription, and of course let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Staff Sergeant Williams, walking along the row of destroyed tanks, gradually realized the true value of this weapon system, which during training had seemed almost too revolutionary. The M1 bazooka represented a fundamental shift in anti-tank warfare, completely changing its paradigm. Heavy artillery pieces, requiring numerous crews and complex positioning, were replaced by a light weapon accessible to ordinary riflemen. The principle of chemical energy meant that even a private with just 6 weeks of training could destroy tanks that previously required powerful artillery systems or specialized anti-tank guns to defeat. Humidity problems that plagued early bazooka operations in the Pacific had been largely resolved thanks to improvements in the M9 rocket's design. The blunt-nosed warheads used on Saipan contained copper cones manufactured to within thousandths of an inch, ensuring stable performance even in harsh tropical conditions that could disable less refined weapons. What began as an experimental system was quickly becoming standard equipment for Marine infantry units preparing to face enemy armor. Colonel Goto's body was found next to his Type 97 command tank, which had first been struck by several bazooka rounds and then definitively finished off by a 75mm shell from one of the Shermans. His death symbolized not just the loss of a regimental commander. It marked the end of an entire Japanese tank doctrine, designed for a completely different type of war. Mass tank assaults, which had been successfully employed in China and during the early stages of the Pacific Campaign, were now hopelessly obsolete against defenders equipped with adequate anti-tank weapons and trained to use them effectively. The tactical lessons learned from these wrecks were profound and undeniable. Japanese armor was originally designed to support infantry, where its thin armor provided sufficient protection against small arms fire and shell fragments. The 30 and 47mm guns mounted on most Japanese tanks were effective against lightly armored targets, but they catastrophically lacked the power to engage American armor at meaningful ranges. Most critically, Japanese tank doctrine was built on the assumption that night attacks would provide the advantages of surprise and concealment, capable of overcoming superior enemy firepower. But under the illumination of star shells, which turned night into day, these assumptions collapsed overnight. 5-inch naval shells eliminated any possibility of surprise or concealment, while the superior optics and fire control systems on American weapons allowed for accurate fire at ranges where Japanese guns were completely ineffective. The casualty ratio achieved in this night battle: 31 Japanese tanks destroyed against virtually negligible marine armor losses, reflected technological and tactical advantages that extended far beyond simple numerical superiority. Intelligence officers inspecting the destroyed vehicles found evidence of hurried modifications, clearly indicating the Japanese awareness of their armor's inadequacy. Some tanks carried additional steel plates, hastily welded over vital areas, while others showed signs of improvised side skirts designed to protect against shaped charges. These field modifications, alas, proved useless against weapons that penetrated armor through chemical energy rather than kinetic impact. But they irrefutably revealed the Japanese's deep understanding that their equipment was hopelessly obsolete in the face of a new era of warfare. Imagine yourself on a battlefield where every clang of an enemy tank's tracks means imminent death. Your bullets bounce off. Your shells are powerless. Do you know that feeling of helplessness when you come face to face with superior armored might? We've been there, and we know what it's like. But what if I told you that one invention changed the course of the war, turning once invincible steel monsters into burning boxes? How was this possible? And why did Japanese tanks, once the pride of the empire, suddenly become useless scrap metal? Today, we will uncover the secret of the weapon that revolutionized anti-tank combat. At a time when many armaments seemed hopelessly outdated in the face of new military tactics, the M6A3 rocket emerged. It carried something revolutionary, a shaped charge warhead. This warhead, containing only about 2 pounds of explosive, was skillfully placed around a perfectly machined copper cone. Upon impact, the explosive detonated not simply, but from the rear forward, instantly transforming this copper cone into a high-velocity stream of molten metal. The speed of this jet was measured in miles per second, and it maintained its integrity for several inches, effortlessly penetrating even the thinnest armor of Japanese tanks, piercing directly into their crew compartments and leaving behind only deadly consequences. Sergeant Shira methodically collected the spent rocket tubes scattered around his position. Each tube, like a silent witness, marked a destroyed Japanese tank whose steel threat had forever passed Marine positions. 11 rockets fired resulted in 9 confirmed kills, demonstrating a level of effectiveness previously unimaginable for traditional anti-tank weapons. The revolutionary principle of the shaped charge transformed ordinary infantry units into formidable tank hunters, completely eliminating the need for cumbersome and vulnerable specialized anti-tank guns, which were also extremely difficult to deploy quickly on the battlefield. As the burial teams began their grim mission, extracting the remains of Japanese servicemen from the twisted tanks, the true scale of the 9th Tank Regiment's defeat became evident. In less than 4 hours of fighting, an entire armored unit had been completely annihilated. The regiment's personnel suffered nearly 100% casualties, and all its equipment was irrevocably lost. This regiment, which was assigned a key role in the operation to recapture Saipan, would never again rise to battle. Its surviving fighters were scattered, and its tactical doctrine, it turned out, was fatally outdated. Meanwhile, the bazooka teams responsible for this crushing defeat were already cleaning their weapons, preparing for their next assignment. Their unwavering faith in the superiority of American technology and impeccable training was powerfully reinforced by this night of triumphant combat. They irrefutably proved that shaped charge weapons could penetrate any armor the Japanese could field, thereby transforming the Pacific War into an uncompromising contest between colossal American industrial might and unyielding Japanese bravery, an outcome that could only be one. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. 2 nights later, after the dust settled and the smoke cleared, weariness enveloped the Marine positions, as heavy as the tropical humidity. However, the armored threat that had dominated tactical planning since the day of the landing had vanished forever. Sergeant Shira sat in his foxhole, methodically cleaning his M1 bazooka, which had become an extension of his professional self. Every detail received the attention required to maintain the weapon's flawless operation in an environment seemingly designed to destroy any equipment. Around him, 6 Marines remained vigilant, exuding the calm confidence of men who had proven their worth against the enemy's best efforts and emerged victorious. The Japanese attempted another offensive on the night of June 18th, but without armored support. Their attacks lacked the necessary power to seriously threaten the beachhead perimeter. Infantry assaults, which might have succeeded against unprepared positions, shattered against Marines who had integrated their weapons into overlapping fields of fire, leaving the enemy no chance for infiltration. The 37mm guns, which had just recently destroyed tanks, now switched to canister rounds, sweeping the approaches with steel balls, while bazooka teams regrouped to cover dead zones inaccessible to conventional weapons. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, don't forget to let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Lieutenant Colonel Walker carefully studied intelligence reports that painted a picture of Japanese desperation across Saipan. With the complete annihilation of the 9th Tank Regiment, enemy commanders had lost their primary tool for mobile counterattacks against the expanding beachhead. Type 95 tanks, until recently considered cutting-edge Japanese armored technology, proved to be obsolete machines, operated by brave men on inherently impossible missions. Their 12 for 25 mm armor plates could not provide protection against shaped-charge weapons, which bypassed traditional defenses through chemical energy rather than kinetic impact, completely changing the rules of the game. The pattern of destruction, so effectively demonstrated during the night battle, was already being meticulously studied and refined for future operations. Illumination provided by naval artillery eliminated the darkness Japanese forces needed for tactical surprise, while bazooka teams, operating at ranges of 100 to 150 yards, could fire with almost complete confidence in armor penetration. 37mm guns provided accurate fire at longer ranges. Their armor-piercing rounds were capable of penetrating over 50 meters of protection at a 30-degree angle of impact. And 75mm guns, both self-propelled and tank-mounted, provided the finishing power to destroy any target that survived the impact of lighter weapons. Private Brown became something of a celebrity among the other Marines. His role as a bazooka loader in 9 confirmed tank kills earned him recognition, which he accepted with the quiet pride of a professional who had performed his job brilliantly. The M6A3 rockets he worked with during the battle represented technology that was transforming infantry warfare in ways that staff planners were only beginning to comprehend. Each warhead contained precisely engineered components that converted conventional explosives into armor-penetrating systems capable of overcoming any defense the Japanese could field. The principle of the shaped charge itself was elegant in its simplicity. Explosive material placed around a copper cone detonated from the rear forward, transforming the metal into a jet, traveling at speeds measured in miles per second. This jet maintained coherence for several inches, easily piercing steel plate regardless of thickness or angle, and penetrating crew compartments with lethal effect. The physics of the process did not require complex calculations. The correct detonation of the warhead guaranteed armor penetration at effective ranges. Staff Sergeant Williams inspected the M3 75mm self-propelled gun, which formed the cornerstone of the defensive fire plan. Noting how American industrial might translate theoretical requirements into practical weapon systems, the tracked vehicle carried sufficient armor to protect its crew from small arms fire and shell fragments, while mounting a gun capable of engaging any target on the Pacific battlefield. More importantly, its mobility allowed for rapid changes in firing positions, making it difficult for enemy observers to predict where defensive fire would originate, and rendering it an indispensable asset in the ever-shifting tactical environment. Imagine pitch-black darkness, broken only by the flashes of distant explosions. Suddenly, steel monsters, tanks emerge from that darkness, moving toward you. Does it seem like the end? That ordinary infantry is powerless against such might, especially at night? What if I told you that precisely under such conditions, when all seemed lost, the key to victory was found? A key that turned the tide of an entire war. How was this possible? How did a handful of soldiers, armed with what seemed like experimental weapons, not only hold their ground, but completely annihilate an entire enemy tank regiment, forever changing the tactics of warfare? Today, we delve into one of the most dramatic chapters of the Pacific Campaign, where an event on Saipan forced a re-evaluation of all doctrines of warfare. We will reveal how American forces, facing a desperate night offensive, managed to transform a potential catastrophe into a decisive victory. You will learn how innovations in weaponry and brilliant coordination not only halted the enemy, but also sealed the fate of an entire nation. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Against the backdrop of this dramatic night, where every shot could have been their last, American tanks bolstered the defense. A platoon of the renowned M4A2 Shermans embodied the quintessence of the American approach to tank design. Their designers prioritized flawless mechanical reliability and maximum crew protection, valuing these qualities over absolute firepower. These vehicles were armed with 75mm guns, whose range significantly surpassed any counterparts in the Japanese arsenal. Furthermore, their armor confidently withstood shells from the 37mm and 47mm guns that equipped the vast majority of enemy tanks. In conditions where naval artillery transformed the night battlefield into a ghostly daytime landscape, these characteristics of the Shermans proved not merely important, but absolutely decisive. It was precisely these factors that played a pivotal role in the failure of Japanese tactics, which until then had seemed invincible. The death of Colonel Guto was more than just the loss of a unit commander. It signaled the collapse of an entire military doctrine. His tactical ideas, based on massive tank assaults, had brought success in the Chinese campaigns and during the initial phases of the Pacific War. At that time, American forces lacked sufficient effective anti-tank weapons and adequate training for their deployment. Guto believed that surprise and the powerful momentum of an attack could break any resistance, even if the enemy possessed superior firepower. However, on Saipan, these convictions shattered against the steadfast defense, armed with the latest bazookas and illuminating the battlefield, which allowed this formidable weapon to be used with astonishing accuracy. Thus, a completely new weapon came to the forefront, forever changing the rules of engagement. Reconnaissance teams studying the wrecks of burned-out Japanese tanks were already gathering invaluable intelligence. These reports were destined to fundamentally influence American tactical doctrine, shaping its development until the very end of the Pacific War. The effectiveness of high-explosive anti-tank, heat ammunition against even the thinnest armor was confirmed by undeniable facts. However, another equally significant discovery was made: the demonstration that well-coordinated defensive fire could completely annihilate advancing enemy formations long before they reached effective striking range. The lesson learned from that night was crystal clear. The integration of various weapon systems creates a synergistic effect that surpasses the mere sum of their individual capabilities. This discovery opened the door to an entirely new role for the ordinary infantryman on the battlefield. For Shira, one of the many participants in those events, this night battle was more than just a successful defensive operation. It became a moment of truth. The bazooka, a 2.36-inch rocket launcher, still regarded as somewhat experimental during training, had now proven its absolute combat effectiveness. It was recognized as standard equipment for all Marine Corps units slated to face enemy armor. This powerful yet lightweight weapon empowered infantrymen to destroy tanks, a task that previously required cumbersome and specialized anti-tank guns. This innovation fundamentally altered the tactical balance of power, overturning previous notions of armored versus infantry engagement. But what was the broader strategic impact of this victory? Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for your like and subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Within weeks, Saipan was declared completely secure, and its airfields rapidly transformed into crucial bases for B-29 strategic bombers. From here began the systematic and deliberate destruction of Japan's industrial infrastructure. The tank attack, which, according to Japanese command's design, was intended to push American Marines back into the sea, instead only hastened Japan's ultimate defeat. It led to the annihilation of critically important mobile reserves that could have prolonged the campaign. With the complete rout of the 9th Tank Regiment, Japanese commanders lost their primary tool for launching counterattacks against the continuously expanding American perimeter. However, the broader implications of this victory extended far beyond Saipan's geographical boundaries. The tactical methods, brilliantly proven effective in night combat, were immediately refined and subsequently applied in all subsequent operations across the Mariana Islands. There, Japanese forces again faced American units that were now equipped not only with deadly anti-tank weapons, but also impeccably trained in their coordinated deployment. This coordination was made possible by the unprecedented industrial might supporting the American military. The technology of the shaped charge, still largely theoretical in 1943, was rapidly becoming the benchmark by which the anti-tank power of infantry units would henceforth be measured. Brown, one of many Marines, cleaned his rifle with the same meticulous care he used to load bazooka rockets. He perfectly understood that both weapons, despite their differences, embodied the same fundamental truth. Properly directed American industrial might could create equipment that empowered individual soldiers with capabilities that previously required entire large units. An empty M1 bazooka weighed only about 13 pounds, yet its destructive power allowed it to destroy tanks that took the enemy months to produce and years to train their crews. The exhaustion that still hung over the Marine positions gradually gave way to a deep, calm satisfaction. The implications of their triumph became crystal clear. They didn't just withstand a night attack. They completely annihilated an entire enemy tank regiment while suffering incomparably fewer casualties. This was more than just a local battle. It was a vivid lesson in how adaptability and the correct application of technology could change the outcome of a war. The casualty ratio achieved during this battle eloquently testified to technological and tactical superiority. These advantages only grew as American industry reached its peak production and training programs continuously refined methods, drawing on invaluable experience gleaned directly from combat. This was a story of how the ability to adapt to new battlefield realities became the decisive factor. On Saipan, American adaptability and innovation in fierce combat clashed with the rigid tactical inflexibility of Japanese forces. The ultimate outcome of this confrontation was unequivocal. Intelligently integrated solutions, implemented at the small unit level, proved capable of completely routing significantly larger formations whose command continued to adhere to outdated and ineffective doctrines. It was a clear illustration of how technological advancement and strategic thinking triumph over outdated valor. Artificial illumination, which transformed the pitch-black darkness into a semblance of day, combined with shape charges that effectively rendered armor thickness irrelevant, created battlefield conditions under which even unparalleled Japanese valor proved powerless. It could not compensate for the colossal technological and tactical backwardness that only worsened with each passing day of the ongoing war. Saipan became more than just an island. It became a symbol of a new era in military art, where innovation and adaptability triumphed over the dogmas of the past.